Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going beyond basic film criticism to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Justin.
And what movie are we overanalyzing this week?
Cocaine Bear.
So, as is usual, I look up a description of the film and then read it out, but I feel like I'm just going to say, directed by Elizabeth Banks, there's a bear and it's on cocaine. That's it. That's your plot synopsis. Nothing more need be said.
They don't hide the ball with what the movie's premise and what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of action with a coked out bear.
So, a lot of people questioned why I wanted to see this movie. I just thought it looked funny. What did you think?
Yeah, I was caught by, rather riveted by the trailer when I saw it. First, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be some stupid movie. But then I'm like, all right, the trailer. And then I started seeing some of the cast. And there was a lot of very legitimate actors and actresses. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a whirl. If it wasn't that great, oh well, But I thought it was surprisingly well written and highly entertaining.
I thought it was great. And here's the thing that I've spent the ensuing amount of time obsessing over with this movie is that this movie didn't feel like a movie that was set in the 80s. It really felt like a movie that was made in the 80s. It really didn't. It really got into that time period, and I've been trying to in my brain dissect how and why that was so successful.
I noticed that too, and what really stood out to me was just the number of minorities and women in the positions that they were. And as far the fact that you saw women police officers and the forest ranger. And I'm trying to remember the actress's name. She was in Justified and
Margot Martindale.
Yes. So I saw this movie with my sister. My sister immediately knew who she was. I was blanking on her name.
She's totally that guy.
Yeah.
And by the way, I am now resisting the impulse to just do the next 45 minutes straight on Margot Martindale, which I totally could.
She was fantastic.
She's 71 years old.
Really?
Yeah. So I read an interview with Elizabeth Banks, and Margot Martindale was like, I'm 70 years old. You've got to be kidding me. I cannot be doing this kind of movie with stunts or whatever. And they talked her into it, and she was amazing. And I was like, that was so awesome. Okay, so here's a few things that I came up with. Number one, this movie really strongly resisted the urge to be like, look, it's the 80s!
Yeah.
For every nostalgia play that we have seen, which there have been a lot, and there have really leaned heavily into just, you're gonna like it because you're gonna see a Care Bear and some Pop Rocks, this movie, basically had none of that. It was set in the 80s and everyone looked like they were the 80s, but that was it.
Right. I think, that's what I was trying to put my finger on while I was watching it. Because, the clothing, and there's a lot that was very 80s, but you're right, it just wasn't going over the top, like you said, certain other things that go down the nostalgia trip.
It wasn't trying to play on that emotion for you, which I really liked. Number two, I think, obviously it was shot digitally because the bear was CGI. Mm-hmm. But they kind of grained it out to make it look like film, which I think had the dual success of making the bear look less CGI because they didn't shoot it as if it were in high def. So that gave it an 80s feel. And then this is where I sort of hit the end of my knowledge, but this maybe is a stretch. I thought a lot of the shots also were more of that era in terms of there were a lot of mid shots and wide shots, and there weren't as many close-ups and there weren't as many extreme close-ups, which I think have been a function of the improved digital technology where everybody wants to be right up in somebody's freaking eyeball, and I'm this camera stayed back, and I'm I think that's another thing that captured 80s filmmaking much more than modern filmmaking. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it wasn't just the way they filmed it. definitely, because I didn't even think that the bear was CGI, but I mean, but
It
it makes sense. It didn't feel that way, and yeah, just a lot of the shots that they had were. They didn't take you out of the movie. Like it seemed it was really well directed and well shot in my view, and yeah, just so much of the movie flowed and like even with like the way the narrative came together, I was like, okay, this is actually making way more sense. It did. I was expecting it to be sort of like, all right, we'll just do a couple random skits and just lump them together, like sort of how like Coming to America 2 was.
Yeah. Yeah, so I did. I liked it. I was just like, this was just like shot in a way that it felt like an 80s film. And yeah, the CGI bear was terrific, which you know me, like, I will hate on some CGI. And I was like, there were a couple moments where I was like, oh, it looks bad. The cubs were not as good. But for the most part, I thought the bear was fine. But of course, then all of the other effects, practical.
Yes. Yes, especially at I guess let's kind of get to the end with Ray Liotta's, like the way they shot that. I was like, oh, this seems very like practical effect oriented.
There was some old school practical gore in this movie. Like, it was gory. It wasn't like torture porn gore, but it was like, there was some gore. Yeah.
Not Saw, but it was certainly more gory than I was expecting, but not in a way where I felt like, oh, this is gratuitous. Like it didn't feel, it wasn't constant.
I mean, it was a horror movie. Like, it needed to be, that's fine. That's appropriate to what it was. I mean, I closed my eyes through a lot of it, so if you want to make further comments what it was like, I didn't actually see almost any of, only the stuff that completely caught me by surprise. Like that guy getting shot by Margot Martindale, where it like blows through his head.
Yes. I was like, woo! That scene, I was not ready for that. Like, I was thinking, okay, I was expecting the bear to be there, but yeah, that was just highly like I just was not ready for that.
Yeah, but that whole sequence then culminating in the like ambulance. So like they're having a standoff in the ranger station, and then Margot Martindale gets like, quote unquote, like rescued by these two ambulance drivers, and like that whole thing, and then she comes flying out of the air. I was just like, that was it. That was the best sequence of the movie for me.
It was just over the top comedy. Like, I was just busting out laughing watching like that entire sequence. It was so absurdly over the top, but appropriate for the way this film had been going.
Yeah, no, I thought it was so funny. It hit like a lot of like kind of obvious notes of like, don't open the door, fight scene in the bathroom. I don't know why everybody has fights in the bathroom. Is this the thing that happens in men's room and I don't know?
No, it doesn't. And I can even in my experience as a movie theater usher in high school, no, not a whole lot of fights in the bathroom. There's a lot of other stuff going on in the bathroom, but it's not that.
Yeah, and so I don't know. Like I did think it was a fun ride, and I thought so I had the benefit of seeing it in like a relatively crowded theater. I don't know if you did.
I had the exact opposite experience. It was just my sister and I alone watching a matinee screen of it, and it was perfect because we just got to talk throughout the whole movie.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so then tell me from your perspective, like, how did you feel about the bear?
The bear just struck me as sort of like a force of nature. Like, the best analog I can think of, especially given like the opening of it, it was very reminiscent of the shark from Jaws, at least to me. Like, how it's just like this sort of primal apex predator, killing people. But it worked. Like, to me, even though the bear is sort of driving most of the movie, it wasn't the main attraction for me. Like, I which was surprising. That's how I thought it was going to go. I ended up being more interested with Kerry Russell's character, the two kids, even like the Ray Liotta's son. I'm blanking on that actor's name.
Alden.
Yeah, how he's going to, and then O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s character I thought was great, and even Isaiah Whitlock. Jr. He
didn't do it.
Yes, I was waiting for his signature line from The Wire, but nope, we didn't get that.
He didn't get that. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. Like, I thought the movie did a really good job of, just like you said, it was just like a force of nature. It was like Twister even, or, you know, it was just a bear being a bear who's on cocaine. Like, you're neither, for most of the movie at least, you're not like angry at the bear for being a bear, right?
Right. The bear's doing what, and the sort of reveal, well, not sort, it was a reveal towards in the third act, when you realize, oh, this bear's not a male. It's a female bear, and the bear has cubs. I'm like, oh, this is a nice little twist or play with like the expectations I'm sure the audience had going in, and you had a bit more, at least for me, a bit more empathy and sympathy for the bear. Yeah,
so that's why I was going to ask you, because it was palpable in the room, that switch. So first of all, the cubs showed up and everyone was like, oh my God, they're so cute. Like everybody was
like pandas.
Yeah, they were like,
no, polar bears. That's what the case is, polar bears.
Like people were super into that. And then when it was like, when she was defending her cubs, like my audience suddenly was like, team freaking bear. Like yes. I thought that was very effective too. And then it made me think, like, how have I felt about this bear up until this point? And I realized I was like, okay, so another example, which they remade, scare quotes by me that you can't see. There was like a Idris Elba movie with a lion. And I was like, so it's like Cujo, but it's a lion.
Yeah. It's like on some plane in
Beast
Africa.
Or something.
I did not watch it. I was like, no.
I didn't, because I've seen Cujo, and I was kind of like, but like when you're watching Cujo, you're like, something wrong with that dog. That dog is evil. Like you.
Oh, it's not just rabies?
Just like you're not conflicted. Like you're like, that dog should be killed and put down. But there's like moments when they're like going to shoot the bear, even before you find out she has cubs, and you're like, I mean, is it really the bear's fault?
No, I mean, the bear was minding its business doing bear things in the forest.
Then it got high. And
yeah.
Let's do some more of this stuff. So I thought that was really interesting, that I thought actually that was kind of a hard line to walk. And I thought it was really, like, I think the best part to me about the film was that, like, you're just sort of like, bear's gonna bear. Yeah. Hi, bear's gonna... Hi.
Yeah.
Coat up bear gonna coat up bear. Like...
Yeah, it was, and also that part with the reveal about the bears being a mother bear, it was sort of parallel in my mind to what was going on with Kerry Russell's character and trying to protect the two kids. So you see this, there's sort of that mirroring at play, at least with how they framed it. At least, that's how I took it anyway.
Yeah, no, I took it that way too. I thought that was like an interesting, that was an interesting way to set it up and see through it. And then I was trying to sort of think about like, okay, like who become the victims of the bear?
So my sister had a astute remark, and I got to give Courtney credit for this. She called it, when we were watching, she said, the people who are going to survive this are the people who are showing actual common sense. Like, who aren't doing just dumb things throughout. And sure enough, she predicted, she's like, these people are going to survive and these people are going to die. And she was like 100% on the money with it. I don't know how she came to that, but she just intuitively understood, oh, these people are just doing dumb stuff, like they're clearly going to die.
Okay. I mean, well, where does that leave Isaiah Whitlock?
Well... yeah, because he wasn't dumb, but
he was kind of dumb because he was standing on that roof and couldn't get down.
Yeah. So because we were debating, like, is he gonna make it? And then she said, well, we'll find it once they get to like the gazebo, and then like had that showdown with the drug dealers, and then the one kid from the gang who they like thrown the duffel bag up on top. I knew he was cooked once Ray Liotta's character pulled up with the rifle. I'm like, oh, this is how he's gonna die. He's gonna get shot, but he didn't die by the bear's hands. No, he did. Yes, the bear didn't kill him.
The bear did not kill him. I did have that moment of like, there was a physics part of my brain that was like, 2 people get landed on by the bear. And I'm thinking, like, bears are heavy. I feel like if a bear landed on you, it might crush your ribs. Like, I don't know, though. Like, I was just like...
Hopefully I never get to experience that. But,
I did have... So, like, speaking of common sense, like, again, so I'm at the Alamo. The lady sitting next to me orders a shot and 2 beers and then, like, is topping stuff off out of a flask in her bag to give you an overall sense.
She came to have a good time.
What this was like. Yeah, we all came to have a good... Like, it was the Alamo, drinks are being served. So, like... So when the, like, Henry, like, the little kid is in the tree, I'm like, you don't climb a tree because you're just going to fight a bear in a tree. And then, like, they cut back later and the guy's like, bears can climb trees. Like, did you not know? And so she was like, ah! Like, she started laughing because you remember me saying it. And I was like, that's what I'm here for, right?
Yes.
Like, that was great, too, because I was like, that wasn't a lot of common sense. And I love the whole debate about, like, what you do if there's a bear.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's, like, back in the day, like, noted travel writer Bill Bryson has a story, writes a book about hiking the Appalachian Trail with a friend. And, like, the opening sequence, he's like, the thing I'm most worried about is bears. And he's like, and I read all this bear stuff, and I read all this stuff about, like, if it's this type of bear, you play dead, and if it's this type of bear, you fight, and, like, whatever. And he's like, but the thing is, like, there's still, like, anecdotal stories of the people who played dead, and it didn't work, and the people who fought that kind of bear, and that were, you know, he's like, so basically I've decided that if you encounter a bear in the woods, you should run. It will give you something to do with the last 7 seconds of your life. And I was like thinking of that when they were talking about the trees, and I was like, this is really funny because there's like lots of debate from everybody in terms of the common sense of like, what is the right thing to do? And I'm all like, you don't have to outrun the bear, man. You just outrun
whoever you're with.
So I definitely, like, my audience had a good time, and I had a good time watching it, and I was glad because I was like, oh, I hope this isn't one of those times where I made Justin go to this movie and he's gonna be like, I hate you so much.
No, I did. Well, man, I went in with slightly low expectations, but it far exceeded that. I mean, I just thought there were a lot with the writing in the film. To me, a lot of what happened early in the film definitely came back into play later on. So there wasn't a lot of just throwaway lines or scenes in my view.
Yeah, the other thing I thought was interesting too in terms of subverting expectations and playing with gender. I was actually talking to a coworker about this today, was the underrated co-star of this film, Rosette, the long-haired Shih Tzu. I don't know, the like... As I say, the fancy dog.
Yes.
Like, she's got the, like, you know, she's like a little lap dog with the, like, long hair, and she has, like, little bows in her hair, and her name is Rosette.
Definitely a dog you keep in the house, not one you have outside as a guard dog.
Yes. But, like, so then in the beginning of the movie, like, there's a lot of, like, he's like, I kind of wanted, like, a more manly dog. Mm-hmm. And now I have this, like, fancy dog. But then he's, like, sort of won over by her. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, like, she rides off into the sunset.
Right. She gets a happy ending.
Yeah, and there's, like, a sort of sense of, like, okay, a dog is a dog, and, like, any kind of dog can be man's best friends. Like, don't judge a book by its cover kind of thing. And just because she looks like a prissy little lady, like, doesn't mean that she can't still be worth time in your life. And I was like, I thought that was, like, an interesting, like, through point as the 2 animals mm-hmm. are women, right? And you have the, like, very fierce bear woman, and then you have the very, like, not fierce
I didn't think
female dog.
I didn't think about that dichotomy as I was watching the movie, but you're right, it was there.
Like, yeah, so I thought, you know, you have this sort of, you end up having the female bear be really, like, nurturing and loving, and then you have the female dog who ends up being, like, man's best friend and, like, again, giving them comfort through a hard time. So I thought that was cool. And I have a friend who has like a little lapdoggy thing, and I was like, I feel like all men who like own that kind of dog are kind of like vindicated by this movie.
Elizabeth Banks, she's out here looking out for the cute, prissy dogs in the world. Well, one thing that jumped out to me was how incompetent law enforcement was throughout this movie. I feel like it was a commentary about that.
Okay.
Well, Isaiah Whitlock's character, he was competent in his job, but just about everyone else just seemed either like crooked or just clearly in over their head. Like Margot Martindale's character, she clearly had no business carrying a firearm.
True, but like, I mean, I'm trying to think of like, yeah, I mean, I've met a bunch of forest rangers, like I'm sure you have in your life going to national
I'm not saying that they shouldn't be armed, like, but she just...
She in particular should not have been armed.
She should, yes.
And then you, of course, have the dirty cop.
Yes. Yeah. But, I mean, and then even the most effective police officer gets killed.
Yeah. And so, like, we are going to take a turn with this because we have to, but like I did read one review where he was like, you know, I really tried to see if there was like a bigger theme to this movie and I sure as heck couldn't find one. And I was like, yeah, me neither. And I'm like, I'm okay with that. Like, and Elizabeth Banks didn't try to say that. I was like, I'm okay with somebody but just being like, I just like comedy horror and I thought this was a funny story. And I thought, why not make a movie about a funny idea? And I'm like, yeah, there's got to be room.
Oh, yeah. No, it totally
there's room for B-movies.
Yes. The comedy definitely showed through with some of the deaths, because a lot of them remind me of Coen Brother-esque. Like, it was that energy and vibe, which totally tracked with this, B horror movie.
Yeah, it did. So we have what? We have the drug dealer. We have one, like, kingpin drug dealer. We have two sort of mid-tier level.
Yeah.
We have
one who's clearly not over... Because I'm trying to remember, did his wife... Did she die?
Died,
she died. Yeah, that's what I thought she had died. I couldn't remember if she had died or just left. But yeah, she died. And then, O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s character, losing digits.
Yeah. And, like, just handling it like a real freaking champ and being more concerned about his jersey than the loss of fingers.
Yes, that was a recurring thing, too.
I was just like, oh, and his Air Jordan.
Yes.
Which I guess was only, to me, was, like, the biggest nostalgia nod, but it served a purpose other than... Like, again, it wasn't just to be like, oh, look, he's got Air Jordans. It was like, how, like, new... and important those things were at the time that he's like, oh man, I'm like trekking through mud and stuff. Like, so I said like, okay, this is a story set in 1985 about cocaine. And they do reference, they're like, Nixon's really tightened up the laws. Like, you're going to go to jail for life for this. And so... I promised Justin we were going to talk about the war on drugs in 20 minutes. No. It's a lot to say about it.
Yeah, one of our more successful endeavors.
Yes. I posted on Facebook. I didn't get many responses. Which do you think was more successful? The war on terror or the war on drugs?
I mean, they're both still going on, so that should tell you.
And they were losing both of them.
Yeah.
By a lot. So yeah, war on drugs. Bad idea. A lot of negative consequences.
Almost like people didn't learn anything from prohibition of alcohol, where you just made it more lucrative for organized crime now. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, we can have all of the sort of, like, main culprits, right? Mm-hmm. Mass incarceration, crime, gun crime. But also, like, I was looking at something that, it's like, we kind of know this, but we don't really think about it. But, prohibition stayed within our own borders for the most part, but we pushed the war on drugs out to the rest of the world. So you have missing murdered women in Juarez, right? We have a so-called immigration crisis because of the crimes and the cartels in El Salvador and Guatemala. Like, all of that created by our war on drugs, right? So we've also, like, wrought havoc on, like, so much of South America and Latin America.
Yeah. Colombia, Venezuela, you've had...
the FARC, which they finally made peace with, like, you know... And I think, like, that part of the story doesn't get as much attention or focus.
Right. Yeah, it really doesn't. But it's that rippling effect, because even today, after the invasion in Afghanistan, it's the world's biggest producer of opium. And during the Vietnam War, that area of the world was the biggest producer of opium and heroin. So. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. Are there a couple of things that I, like, wanted to sort of kind of say? So one is, like, yes, we've done a good job of ruining other people, like, other countries' economies with our war on drugs. Two, everybody knows, like, the mass incarceration. I mean, I hope everybody knows, like, the mass incarceration, the disproportionate effect on Black communities. But, like, I wanted to quote something that has stuck with me for a really long time, and I can't even tell you what it's from because it's that old, but I still remember it, where somebody was trying to explain about the, like, racism of our drug laws.
Oh, yeah. It's...
But the example they gave is, like, no one walks through a college dorm trying to arrest weed smokers.
No. But think about why it's called marijuana. There's implications of, like, dealing with, like, Mexico. And even if you look at the writing at the time, people were talking about jazz musicians. So that's clearly Black people, brown people. There's always this element in how it's, even too with the concerns about, like, opium, it's like, oh, it's the yellow peril ruining white women. Like, things like that's a recurring thing throughout all of these efforts, especially in the early 20th century with, like, drug restrictions.
Yeah, but I do think it sort of carries over to this day where we still think that some people who do drugs deserve to be punished, and some people who do drugs are fine.
So the crack and cocaine disparities with, like, sentencing, like that's a prime example of that.
Right, like we watch whatever, you know, Wolf of Wall Street, like all those coked up guys, investment bankers were like, well, that seems fine because they can still do their job or whatnot. But, like, even if you keep it within race, but then you're like, but if you're some, like, poor white person doing meth, then you're messed up and so, like, I think so one of the things I think is interesting about the war on drugs and, like, why, I don't know, I guess I'll put it to you. Why do you think we're still fighting the war on drugs?
I think there are multiple reasons for that, but mostly it's very profitable, I'd say. Well, obviously for the cartels, but even if you're a politician, can you think of a politician that ever loses by saying, "Oh, I'm tough on crime"? Like, that's not going to be a losing proposition in this or many countries. Like, people can routinely run, "I'm going to, you know, have harsher sentences," and people just respond to that. Like, it's...
Yeah, but I mean, like, a lot of states are legalizing marijuana.
Well, that's a positive trend that we finally gone in that direction. But yeah, I mean, it still hasn't been removed off, I guess, whatever the schedule that the federal government placed it on.
So I think of two things. Here's my theory on it. So number one, I've long been of the political platform that we should just legalize crime.
Crime or drugs?
Just crime. Like, you know, it's like, I don't want prostitution. I don't want, you know what I was like, legalize as much as we can possibly legalize.
So you're saying, like, victimless crimes?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
Like, not like, you shouldn't be able to murder people, but like, sort of like jokingly, like, yeah, well, we should just legalize crime. But so when I say that to people and I'm like, and they're like, well, you know, like, they're decriminalizing marijuana. And I was like, all drugs.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go shoot up heroin if it's legal tomorrow. Like,
but 90% of people I say that to kind of get a look in their face and they're like, but not heroin. Like, you're actually the first person who's like, yes, heroin too.
It's not going to change any of my habits.
Like, the vast majority of people, like, that I've said that to, like, their first response is like, but not heroin. Like, and I'm like, so there's a line in your head.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where it is. You may not know where it is, but on one side there's marijuana and the other side there's heroin. And you are not comfortable with legalizing heroin. And like, I haven't ever like pushed back on anybody. Like, let's interrogate why your instinctual reaction is like, but not heroin.
Which, it's ironic too that heroin was invented supposed to be a better alternate than opium. Like, that's literally how it was produced around World War One. And I'm pretty sure it's Bayer. Or if not them, but it was...
Would be Bayer.
Yeah, but like it was meant to be a painkiller that was less addictive than opium. I mean, clearly not. I mean, it was highly effective as far as being a painkiller, but...
Yeah, right. Ask Purdue Pharma about that too, right? Yeah, and so I think like, okay, so I get it. Like, on the one hand, like, you can legitimately die from a heroin overdose, like the first time you do heroin, right?
Yeah.
Which is not really true of marijuana. So, like, fair enough. Like, I can see that line. But I also think there's just, like, there's, like, a morality to it that people are stuck on that they can't really... I can't talk them out of their morality with facts. Like, and nor should anyone be able to talk anybody out of... But it's like, this is wrong, and the people who do wrong thing need to be punished, right? Like, or need to be prevented from doing wrong thing. Like, there is just this, like, moral thing that I think for a lot of people kicks in when you talk about drugs.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that is just the fact that, you know, you had... like Nixon basing a lot of his political strategy of like, hey, we're going to be tough on this because the sorts of people who are associated with this definitely aren't in my voting base, and it'll get my voting base excited to come vote for me and my policies. And then you get to the 80s, and yeah, I mean, it gets ramped up and clearly ineffective. All you did was just make some pretty bad and violent people a whole lot of money.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I think it's clear that it doesn't work. But what I struggle with is, like, it so manifestly does not work, and yet people cannot let it go. And you're like, then if it's about, then it's about emotion or something else.
Yeah,
like, right?
It's clearly not logic driven.
Right.
Like that policy, it's not driven by like logic or actual facts.
Yeah, and so sort of my supporting evidence from this theory is like, I've done a lot of reading too on like the rehab industry, talk about profit, like, and that too is very much based on morality and willpower and like AA, like surrender to the higher power and all that stuff. And you're like, okay, like none of this works. Like, willpower does not work.
So you're not a fan of Green Lantern.
It doesn't get you up. We have all the statistics. Like, it's remarkably ineffective. And I guess there's evidence that, especially if you are someone who's, you know, been long-term hooked on certain substances, like, your brain on chemistry might be permanently altered. Like, it's like really, really almost impossible for you ever to...
And I suppose maybe that is one element of heroin, that it is literally a physiologically addicting substance. Like, your body, like, it's...
starts to crave it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm like... And so then it's like... But that sort of moral sense of like, this is a bad thing, so you should just not do it because it's bad, kind of carries through to how we think about rehab in this country. And that also, like, again, totally almost completely ineffective. There are more effective ways, which we don't like to consider or fund. And so it's like, I think we're just like stuck in this weird place where we cannot get out of our own way.
Well, I think some of that too ties with, if you look at how the criminal justice system works, it is very much coming from a punitive perspective, not a rehabilitative. Like it's for whatever, like, I don't know if it's like our culture, country, the way our laws, it's very much a punitive perspective on how we handle just crime in general.
Right. Right. But I think, like, I think with, like, a lot of vice crimes, one thing that is also, like, sort of foundational about our system is that we cannot help but blame the quote-unquote victim, right? Like, we prosecute drug users, and we could just say, like, we're only going to go after, like, drug sellers, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think there's a difference. Like, I do think it's worse to be someone who is in the criminal enterprise of selling drugs than there it is in someone who is, like, a user of said drugs. And, like, you know, you could go after Johns, and instead they just round up prostitutes, right? Like, so we could do that, and we also just don't like doing that. Like,
yeah, I mean, even with the way we fight the war on drugs, we're approaching it as if it's a supply side issue, but whenever there's a demand, someone's going to fill that demand.
Right. Right.
And this is clearly a highly lucrative industry.
Well, and again, I think, though, even then, like, when it comes down to the demand and stuff, too, like, I think there are people who are like, well, this person can keep their Wall Street job and do coke, so it's okay. Right? Like, I think people just sort of are like, when I do it, it's fine, but when you do it, it's bad. Mm-hmm. Like, people have, on the one hand, this very weird moral stance, and on the other hand, it's a pretty freaking flexible morality.
Well, yeah, it applies to, it's sort of like the adage that, like, I've heard some people say that, you know, you have in-groups and out-groups in society where laws are meant to protect the in-group and they're meant to apply to the out-group. Yeah.
I haven't heard that before, but that's really a good point. And so I think, like, I mean, I really, really, really want out of the war on drugs, but I really don't, like, see an end game to it.
No, not really. I mean, we're just going to keep muddling through, sort of like what's going on with the war on terrorism. Like, yeah, that's... So I guess you maybe start asking who benefits from the status quo, because it has to be somebody who's, like, benefiting to want to keep these policies in place.
Well, pro tip, one of the people who are benefiting is apparently a lot of these rehabs engage in, like, basically slave labor. Look up the podcast on that one, friends, because there have been some pretty good investigative reporting that, like, so you go to a rehab and they again, it's just like, it's such a moral, dare I say, Christian lens.
Protestant work ethic.
Where, yeah, of like, oh, you're going to, like, you're going to work hard and that's going to get you off of drugs. And then, in fact, they're literally selling your labor to, like, a construction company.
Oh, wow. So... it's a pretty foundational part of this country's history, though.
Yeah, and, like, no one's getting that money. And, like, those people are not getting that money. They're, like, literally providing. And then, you know, of course, you have the whole issue of literal slave labor in the prison system as well.
Right.
It's funny. I feel like I'm usually the one who always makes the economics argument because I'm actually the economist, but, like, we're on different sides of this one, and you're the one making the economics argument. I'm like, no, it's, like, a moral issue, Justin. And so that's, like, what I think really frustrates me about this, because I think there's just people who are just like, I don't care if it doesn't work. These people need to be punished.
Yeah, they're I'd argue, I don't know what the exact breakdown would be in society, but I bet you're probably about 20 to 30% of the population that just thinks that.
Oh, really? I would go higher, but again,
well, I'm saying at a minimum.
Yeah, that's just a supposition. Like, I definitely think there's a profit motive. I think there's a lot of, you know, private prisons. Like, I think there's an incredible amount of forces, like, who are preying upon that basic emotion. But I just think there's just so many people who just can't with drugs. They're just, like, drug bad.
Yeah.
Is it Nancy Reagan's fault? I don't know.
That was just a waste of time and energy.
Again, there's, like, a ton of evidence that backs up the fact that, in fact, that was a total waste of time and energy. Yeah. I don't ever remember thinking that it was gonna, like, I don't ever remember a time where I was a little kid and they came in and I was convinced at all by their case.
No. Yeah, no, Dare was not moving the needle. So, I mean, no pun intended, but yeah, we just love having certain programs, or people just get in their head, this is what we're going to do. who cares if it's actually affecting out? We got the money for it. This is what we're going to push out here. So,
yeah. So, like, final thing, kind of tying it into today then, the other thing that I was thinking about, man, I mean, we hate when people sell drugs unless they're doctors, right?
I was visiting my parents the other week, and one thing that just stood out to me, we were watching some TV, the sheer number of commercials for drugs, like pharmaceutical drugs in this country. And if you go to other countries, you don't...
This was in Ohio?
No, this is in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
North
Okay.
Carolina. But,
home of Research Triangle Park?
Not too bad. It was a Raleigh TV station we were watching. And I made that point to them, and especially when they listen to, like, all the side effects and just people don't think of how bizarre it is that you're able to advertise pharmaceutical drugs on TV, but other countries don't operate that way. And it's like, why should you be telling people, oh yeah, go ask your doctor to like write this for you? Like, it's kind of insane when you think about it.
It is. And actually I was thinking about the fact that, like, okay, so we're totally willing to go after all kinds of, like, whatever, cartel people, but, like, it's actually been very hard for them to prosecute, like, doctors who ran opioid pill mills. Yeah. Right?
And it's like legalized heroin.
Yeah, I know. And it's like, they are definitely part of the overprescription, and there are definitely bad doctors who were, in fact, drug dealers, and, like, somehow those people have kind of... Again, it's like the morality is there, but it just doesn't apply.
But that's because doctors help people.
Well, they went to school, and they took out student loans probably, so, like, obviously they're good people. Yeah, we advertise. Yeah, so it's like also like it's so interesting because we have a prescription pill drug crisis, and that's just being handled really differently.
Well, if you look and see probably who's the victims are, or the people who are addicted, I think that has an element to it because you tend to see different like race and probably socioeconomic class of people who get hooked on these prescription drugs, and those drugs are okay. So yeah. these people should be treated differently. But these other people, well, they're already predisposed to being bad. It's to me that's what the subtext with how we handle punishing people with those drug issues.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think it's. And I just think that's like it's such a deeply held thing. And I'm like, I don't see how we get away from it other than like maybe the next generation
just saying, all right, we've had enough of this. Yeah, definitely, because you will see, like you mentioned earlier, like poor white meth addicts.
Meth was not
they're treated
they're trash.
Yeah,
they're not actually trash. They are treated as if they were trash. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know, it just stands out to me how like when you see the campaigns to like start criminalizing drugs, they almost always focus, like I said earlier, on minority groups and like them using this as some way to like lure like white women into like, some horrible lifestyles, like, whether it's opium dens, so like that's supposed to be Asian people, and then heroin and like marijuana, that's Latino and like black people. Like it's just wow when you actually just look at like how some of these laws were pushed through. Like they're like, all right, this is a winning campaign.
I'm gonna state for the record as a white lady that like I very rarely get offered drugs. Like almost to my dismay, I'm like it's never happened. Like I'm like at a party and almost no one has ever offered me drugs, and I'm like, I feel like I should get offered drugs more. Do I look like I'm that wholesome and I would not ever do drugs? Like, why don't anyone ever give me drugs?
Yeah, see, and as a black guy, I've definitely been a part of people ask me if I either have them or know how to acquire them for them. I'm like, do you think I like just all black people have them?
Which is so weird.
Yeah, when you look at them with that, you just see like the legitimate shock and bewilderment. I was like, oh, what do you mean you don't have? It's like, no, I don't. Like, go away.
Yeah. That's very hard to believe, dear listeners, based on how Justin actually looks. Like, you would have to only see one thing about Justin and override every other instinct about what he looks like, which is very annoying. Which I get. Again, I understand that's how racism works, but sometimes it's still like, really? Okay, so war on drugs is bad. We should end it, but we don't know how.
I mean, we could just repeal the laws, but good luck getting that through Congress.
Yeah. All right. Final thoughts. After all of this on the movie in terms of a social impact score, 1 being no one saw this movie, it had nothing to say, and it was terrible. 10 being life and movies as we know it are changed forever.
I'd give this one a 3. I don't think it's going to really be too much of a cultural impact. It's an entertaining and fun movie, but I don't think it's going to engender a ton of like think pieces and like people talking about it necessarily years from now. But I'm sure it'd be more highly regarded than, say, Snakes on a Plane.
Yeah, so it did actually pretty well in the box office, all things considered. I mean, it would cost like $15 million, so nowhere to go but up, pretty much. And I think it made close to 30 its first weekend. So,
yeah.
So this one is so hard because in the one sense, I'm like, yeah, like 2-3 is totally. I mean, I would raise it to a 4 because I actually thought it was pretty fun and it had some good people in it. But like, I'm like, it could be a cult classic that could like bump it to a 6, and I just like don't know. It can be totally forgotten. Where I'm like, people like once it starts streaming and stuff could like get totally into it, and you kind of never know with movies. Right. I don't know how to predict a cult classic. So.
Yeah. I mean, again, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was highly entertaining, very well written, and I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're bored. If you're looking for 90 minutes of some fun. Yeah, it's definitely a fun movie.
Yes. All right, I will go first, even though you completely and utterly stole my recommendation. So this is one that I always tell people, like, if you watch The Wire, you then have to watch Justified. Because I think that they are really good companion pieces where The Wire focuses on urban and mostly Black drug trade, and Justified focuses on rural and mostly white drug trade. I'm like, they're just two sides of the same coin, and I think you see a bigger picture if you do both. Also, season 2 was the best season of Justified, and Margot Martindale.
Oh yeah,
freaking rocks that season.
Okay, and my recommendation is Ozark. It's
all right.
Yeah, since we're it's dealing with drugs, but it's more on the side of how the money gets laundered, and you see the more business side of it, and also just the scale, and it's refreshing too because it's in a setting you wouldn't necessarily think, like, who's thinking that people are going to set up shop in like the Ozarks and like launder drug money there. But,
yeah. All right, well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, feel free to leave a comment. Check us out on Facebook, on our website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. Go buy a t-shirt with some of our cool logos on it. It's on our website. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.